This Is Your Life, episode number 5.
This is your life. Are you who you wanna be? This is your life.
Hello and welcome to another episode of This Is Your Life. My name is Michael Hyatt, and this is the podcast dedicated to intentional leadership. My goal is to help you live with more passion, work with greater focus, and lead with extraordinary influence. Before we get started in today's episode, I've got a few announcements I'd like to make. I'm really excited to announce that I'm going to be speaking at Blog World in New York City on June the 5th through the 7th. My new friend Cliff Ravenscraft of the podcast AnswerMan.com has invited me, and we don't have the details nailed down yet, like when I'm going to speak, but we'll announce them on my speaking page at michaelhyatt.com/speaking once we've got them nailed down. Second announcement is that my new book, Platform, Get Noticed in a Noisy World, is still on schedule to be published by Thomas Nelson on May the 22nd. Now get this, I'm going to ask you not to pre-order it yet. And I know that may be a strange request coming from the author, but there's a method in my madness. We've put together an incredible bonus package of 7 resources worth $375.98. And to get this special bonus offer, all you got to do is buy the book. That's it. And I can't tell you more yet because we're still putting together the landing page, but I've been working hard over the last several weeks creating these various programs. And once the landing page is up, you can bet I'll provide you with explicit instructions on how to take advantage of this special pre-launch offer. So more to come. Third announcement, I now have a listener feedback hotline. It's official. You can call 615-656-5001. Let me repeat that, 615-656-5001, and leave a message or a question. And the system sends me an email with an audio file of your message just as soon as you hang up. So if you've got an idea for a podcast you'd like to see or a question about an upcoming episode, I'd love to hear from you. Of course, you're always welcome to email me at feedback@michaelhyatt.com. Either way, whatever's more convenient for you, I would just love to hear from you and get your input on the show. So, okay, let's get into this show's topic. Let me start with a few questions. Do you feel overwhelmed by your email? Do you feel like you're hopelessly behind and you're never going to catch up? Do you feel like stuff is falling through the cracks? If so, I've got great news. Today we're going to be talking about how to take control of your email inbox. Here's the problem. Despite all the current technology and software tools available, many people are falling further behind with each passing day. They just can't seem to keep up with the avalanche of digital messages that are hitting their inbox. I mean, we're inundated with email. In 2010, the last year we have stats on, there were 107 trillion email messages sent. That's 294 billion a day. And the ugly part of this is that 89% of those were spam. Smartphones have added to the problem. They may have initially helped because you could send and receive email on the go, but now smartphones mean we can never get away from email. I mean, it follows us everywhere. For example, see if this describes you. Do you ever check email from your smartphone after you're already in bed? Do you ever check email from your smartphone before getting out of bed? Do you ever check email under the table at a business meeting? Do you ever check email while you're at church? Okay, this is the clincher. Do you ever check email while sitting on the toilet? Social media has created additional inboxes. Now you've got inboxes for Facebook, Google+, LinkedIn, even Twitter in the form of replies and direct messages. And if you blog, the comments you receive are additional messages that have to be read and processed. Let's be honest, when you're not on top of your email, you feel out of control, right? It's like a dripping faucet that gnaws quietly away at your psyche and your self-confidence. It can also torpedo your career since people tend to associate responsiveness with competence. Therefore, becoming an email ninja is an essential survival skill. But is it really possible to get caught up on your email and stay caught up? Yes, I've done it for years, even as the demands of my career have increased. I'm not bragging, it's just fact. But I should warn you, there's no easy fix. Taking control of your inbox means changing your behavior. But I promise you, if you're willing to make the investment, it's possible, and it's definitely worth making the investment. So my premise for this episode is this. You can stay on top of your email by practicing 4 behaviors. So let me give these to you one at a time. Number 1, empty your inbox every day. This should be your goal. You want to be able to go to sleep with every message processed. Now, this doesn't mean you answer every message, but it does mean that you've processed every message, and there's a big difference, and I'll explain what it is in a minute. But again, empty your inbox every day. Your goal is inbox 0. Second behavior, don't get bogged down, keep moving. In other words, you've got to have a workflow process that becomes for you automatic and second nature. And this is key. People often get bogged down because they keep processing the same email message over and over again. They read it, they don't take action, they let it sit in their inbox, and then a few days later, they reprocess it. So nothing really ever progresses. Their emails just build up in their inbox, and it becomes very disheartening very quickly. The key is that once you start processing your inbox, you got to move quickly. Read each message once and answer this question. Is this message actionable? Now, this is a question and a process that I got from David Allen in his book, Getting Things Done. But you've got to ask, is this message, the one I'm looking at right now, is it actionable? In other words, am I being asked to do something? Now, if the answer to that question is yes, there's only 3 possible actions. Number 1, do. D-O. That's right. Take action on the task now. And again, I follow David Allen's 2-minute rule. If I can do what is being requested of me in less than 2 minutes, I do it immediately. This gets stuff off your to-do list before it ever gets on your to-do list. This has the added advantage of making you look very responsive. Number 2, delegate. Pass the task along to someone else. I'm not talking about passing the buck, but often someone else is better equipped to fulfill the sender's request. Dawson Trotman, the founder of the Navigators, once said, I purposed never to do anything that others could or would do when there was so much of importance to be done that others could or would not do. And I tell you, I've made that really a motto for my life. In other words, you've got to try to focus on where you add value and offload everything else you possibly can. Number 3, defer. In other words, just consciously decide you're going to do the task later. Now, this only applies to tasks you cannot complete in 2 minutes or less, or can't delegate to someone else. You can either add this task to your to-do list or schedule an appointment with yourself to complete it. But either way, you defer it. So 3 actions when the answer is yes. In other words, somebody's asking you to do something, and if the answer is yes, 3 actions: do, delegate, or defer. If the answer is no, in other words, someone's not asking you to do something, then you've got 2 options. Delete. Yes, you can use the delete key with your email. Determine if you're going to need the information later. And if not, delete it. My own assumption is that if it's really important, someone somewhere else in the world's got a copy of it. Number 2, you can file it. If you think you might need the information, file it, but do not create an elaborate set of file folders. You may disagree with me on this, but I think this is the single most important piece of advice I can give you. Just file everything in one folder called processed mail. And if it gets more complicated, it leads to procrastination. Trust me on this. You'll have to decide, should I file this under Brian because it's from him, or under Kevin because it's about him? And what happens if the email covers more than one subject? Do you make copies of the email and then put one copy under each folder? Things can get complicated fast. And like I said, it leads to procrastination. It's just too much work. Forget about all that. File your email in one folder and let your email or your system software find it when you need it. The search capabilities of almost every modern email program will enable you to put your hands on any message whenever it's necessary. It may take you a few minutes longer to find a message using this method, but this is more than offset by the hours you waste trying to figure out how to file your messages. When you first begin processing emails I've described, it's going to feel slow and cumbersome. I mean, it's like learning anything else, whether it's, practicing scales on a guitar or learning to go through an exercise routine. It feels wooden. It feels cumbersome. It doesn't feel natural. You have to think about each step. But this won't last long, and it doesn't last long with email processing either. You'll eventually be able to move through these steps without consciously thinking about them or to think about what you're doing. And responding in this manner will become second nature. For example, I can usually process about 100 messages an hour, which is my typical daily volume these days. So that's number 2. Don't get bogged down. Keep moving. Third behavior, use keyboard shortcuts and avoid the mouse. Now, this is just one of my personal pet peeves, but I think it's a productivity step that's really important. The mouse is a horribly inefficient input device. And the good news is that nearly every mouse action has a keyboard equivalent. In Mac OS X, for example, you can even create keyboard shortcuts for any menu item in any software package. So just check under the Apple symbol up in the upper left-hand corner, System Preferences, Keyboard and Mouse, Keyboard Shortcuts. And again, you can create keyboard shortcuts for any item on any menu in any software package. My personal goal is to never use the mouse. Every time I do, I've got to take my hands off the keyboard, and it doesn't sound like it would cost you much time, but it adds up. KeyCue, by the way, KeyCue, that's spelled Keycue, and I've got a link in the show notes, is a Mac program that'll help you learn the shortcuts for any program. I don't know if there's an equivalent in Windows. There probably is, but you can search Google for it. But it's really worth the investment. Alternately, you can check the program's help file and just look up keyboard shortcuts, or if you have to, Google it. But it's worth memorizing the keyboard shortcuts, particularly for your email program. So that's the third behavior. Use keyboard shortcuts and avoid the mouse. Fourth behavior, let email rules filter the low priority stuff. If you haven't discovered email rules, you're really missing a great time saver. Almost every email program out there allows you to create email rules, including Outlook and Apple Mail, which is what I use. In Outlook, they're under the Tools menu. In Mail, they're part of the Preferences panel. And if this sounds a little geeky, they're not really that difficult to use. Like everything, it's going to take a little investment to learn how to use them, but it will save you hours of time. For example, I have a rule that moves email messages I am just copied on to a CC Mail folder. And I assume that these are lower priority messages, and I don't want them cluttering up my main inbox. I get to them when I can, but it's not a high priority. It's certainly not as high a priority as the messages that are directed directly to me. I also get my blog comments via email, and I've got an email rule that automatically places them in a special comments folder so I can get them out of my main inbox and I can process them all at once when I've got time. They're not as high a priority as the messages that are in my main inbox. I also have what I call a BACN, and I spell that BACN. It's not original with me, but this is the stuff you subscribe to, like email newsletters, receipts, and other automatically generated reading material. It's not spam in the technical sense because it's not unsolicited bulk mail. You solicited it, and that's why people have moved to that name called BACN for solicited bulk email. So here's the bottom line. Don't give in to despair. You can keep up with email. You don't have to be a geek, but you've got to learn some new behaviors, in particular the 4 that I mentioned. But in the end, a little extra effort will save you time and give you the satisfaction that you're in control of your workflow. So here's my question for this week. What additional tips would you add for taking control of your email inbox? If you'd like to comment on this episode, go to my blog at michaelhyatt.com, find the episode with this podcast, and you can leave a comment down below the show notes. So from that, let's just take a few listener questions. I had a bunch of them this week. Via Twitter, Rick asked this. He said, at Michael Hyatt, what to do when you're already thousands of emails behind? How to move forward and deal with the existing backlog? Great question, Rick. I had several people write in with a similar question. And I've got a blog post on my blog, which is called, let me just look here. It's called, Is It Time to Declare Email Bankruptcy? And I've got a link in the show notes, which you can go to a little bit later and look this up. But basically, it goes through a series of 7 steps that you need to ask before you declare email bankruptcy. But I think that's a legitimate, probably one-time option that you can take. Just like in your finances, you probably don't want to be declaring bankruptcy more than once. Hopefully you'll never have to declare bankruptcy. But if you're that far behind on your email, sometimes this is the best thing you can do to catch up, try to get a head start and get a sense of momentum, and then put in place the behaviors that I talked about so you don't fall behind again. Somebody else did leave a message on my feedback hotline. Unfortunately, I didn't get their name, but the question was this. They said, is it good to have a professional email and an everyday email? In other words, more than one email address. Yes, I think so. In fact, I've got 4 different addresses that I use. And I don't want to complicate this too much, but let me explain. I use a Bacon email, which is just my Gmail email address. It's a throwaway email address. In fact, I do change it from time to time. But I use this email address for every time I'm required online to enter an email address, because I don't want people having either my professional email or even my personal email. I want them using another email so I know that this is coming from an automated system. It's not an email address that I've given out personally, but it's something I've entered into a website and that those systems can use. So that's my Bacon, again spelled B-A-C-N, my Bacon email. Then I have a personal email account, which is also kind of my public email account, and it's gotten a little simpler since I'm no longer in active management at Thomas Nelson. But I've got a personal email address that people can find, and they can get to me through this address. It's just michael@michaelhyatt.com. I've also got a professional email address, which is my Thomas Nelson email address. And since I'm still the chairman, though I'm no longer the CEO, I'm still the chairman. And there is professional email that I get there at my, quote, work address. And then I've got a super top secret private email address that only my assistant, my managers, my close personal friends have. And it's also the email address that my assistant Tricia uses when she forwards emails in my public folder that I need to address personally. And I'll talk more about that in just a minute. But I do have a private email address that I don't give out publicly. I'm very selective. There's probably not more than 50 people that have that email address, because I want to keep my email manageable and just a small number of email address or email messages in that folder. Justin wrote via email, and he said, do you have a system for allowing your administrative assistant filter all email and respond on your behalf? Yes, I do. Tricia actually looks at all my public email, all my Bacon email, all my professional email, and I don't look at that at all. I only look at the messages that she thinks warrant my personal attention, and she redirects those using Apple email so that they come to my private email inbox, and then I can address them. So she filters through them. If there's, kind of routine questions or issues that she can address and handle on my behalf, she does that. Now, let me tell you an important distinction. She doesn't act as though she's me. So even though she's responding on my behalf, she's responding as Tricia, my assistant. I just feel like that's too disingenuous for her to try to act like she's me. I don't want that. I want her responding on her own behalf, but or using her own name, but on my behalf. So very important distinction. But I think that if you do have an assistant, and if you've got a volume of email that warrants it, I think that's fantastic. For years, as the CEO of Thomas Nelson, I didn't have a private email address. I just handled all the email that came in, and I was able to manage it. And then ultimately, it got to the point where I could be directing my attention to things that only I could do. And in that time, I had Vicky, my assistant then, do a similar kind of process. But it's worked very well for me. And I found that most CEOs, most executives, most small business owners that have an assistant work with some type of a system where they've got a private email where they're only looking at a subset of all the messages they get. I mean, let's be honest, the volume of email that people are getting today makes it very difficult to handle on your own, particularly if you've got serious other responsibilities in a corporation or a church or even a nonprofit. Chris sent me a question via Twitter, and he said, at Michael Hyatt, podcast question, are salutations and valedictions still required in the modern email world? Well, I didn't know what a valediction was, I'm embarrassed to say, until I looked it up, until I Googled it. But it's basically the farewell, the sign off at the end of the email. I don't think it's really necessary I think if it's your style to be really short, and there are people that I know in my life that I deal with, very busy people, best-selling authors, etc., who omit the salutation and the valediction. They just give you the straight message, and that's fine. I mean, I'm personally never offended by it. I don't know if it's a throwback or I'm just a little old-fashioned, but I still like using a salutation by addressing them by their first name, or if it's appropriate, their last name, and then a valediction at the end of it. I think that's great, and I usually just sign off kind regards, or in some cases sincerely, or warm regards, whatever. But I just think it kind of warms up the email and makes it a little more personal. But that's just me. If you want to cut those off, and if you think it warrants it, and if it makes it faster for you to get through more email, fine. And by the way, I have the valediction just sort of as a default in my signature. So unless I override it, it's going to say kind regards, comma, and then Michael, and then all my different ways to contact me. So that's just part of my signature. So it's really not that big a deal. David wrote in with a pretty complicated question, and he said this. He said, "Hello, Michael. Your Twitter feed and blog is one of my favorites. I'm sure I'm not the only one, but I reached a point of I hate email several years ago." He said, "I recognize it's a necessary evil, though, and in many ways, it's a killer app because it's so technology agnostic, and even folks new to technology tend to grasp it very quickly." He says, "I've had a non-junk mail volume exceeding 1,000 per day for a long time." Let me just say, wow, that's a huge number of messages. And I would just say, what could you do to reduce that volume? I don't know. There may be nothing, but I would certainly give some thought to that. But he continues, he said, "With Google Apps and Mac Mail with smart folders, this is manageable. On a mobile device, it's a different story. Other than the Gmail app on my iPhone, do you have any suggestions of effectively prioritizing and managing an inbox from an iPhone in a way that can seamlessly transition to the desktop later?" Well, honestly, I don't, because I don't use my smartphone, and in my case, it's an iPhone as well, for doing heavy email processing. I'll respond in a pinch, but I like to wait till I get back to my laptop or at least my iPad so that I can go through my normal workflow and my normal processing. I'm just faster that way. So I'm very careful about not doing it routinely on my mobile phone. So I don't really have any good suggestions for you how to have a system that would work seamlessly with your desktop later. David also continues, he says, "By the way, I switched from a BlackBerry to an iPhone. For the same time windows spent managing email, I'm sending about 30% fewer emails because the iPhone is that much less efficient with an on-screen keyboard versus tactile. Navigating through messages is also painfully slow compared to keyboard-based navigation. I'm seriously considering switching back to BlackBerry or adding a BlackBerry to my hip just to be able to manage email more effectively. Do you have any other thoughts on mobile efficiency?" Well, I would have to say, David, that I do agree that a BlackBerry is much more efficient with email. I haven't used one since the first iPhone came out, but I can tell you that's one aspect of the BlackBerry, the only aspect of the BlackBerry that I miss. It was very fast for processing email. And I find that the iPhone keyboard, I'm constantly messing up, although the autocorrection has gotten better. But I don't have another recommendation for you. I don't process a lot of email on my iPhone, so it's not a big problem for me. And I do use a lot of other apps on my iPhone, so it's worth having the iPhone. And I wouldn't think, personally, about going back to the BlackBerry. But again, that's just me. I'm pretty tool agnostic as well. I say use whatever works for you. John wrote in and he said, "In Gmail, do you ever delete emails or do you just let them accumulate as Google wants you to do?" Well, my email accounts are hosted on Google, all of them except the Thomas Nelson account, and I do delete them. I don't let them just accumulate. I do archive everything else because I figure, it really doesn't cost me anything and I might want to get back to it later, but I do delete some emails as well. John continues, he said, "Have you found a way to create multiple signatures in Gmail like you do in Outlook, or in my case, I do it in Mail, for cookie cutter responses?" And I've got another blog post where I talk about using email templates to say no. And I have a ton of email templates that I use and that Trisha uses that are sort of canned responses to the typical questions that we get on a regular basis. And I use email signatures in Mail, Apple Mail for that, but I've not found a way to do that in Gmail because I use Apple Mail to even manage my Gmail accounts. So I'm not using the browser-based interface. I really don't know what's available there, so I'm afraid I can't be much help to you. Bob wrote in And he said, "Hi, Michael, saw your tweet about the podcast on managing email. My question has to do with the amount of time spent working with already processed email. I get the principles of processing, but then I wonder if I spend too much time getting back to actionable emails. What's normal for you? Thanks." And what he's talking about is, remember when I was talking about processing email, and sometimes you can process it in 2 minutes or less, and I was encouraging that if you could do that, do it. Don't put it on your to-do list. I think what Bob's talking about is those messages where you can't do it in less than 2 minutes, and you're putting it on a to-do list somewhere. And I use, by the way, Noseby as my task list manager. Well, I think it depends on the kind of message it is. I mean, if it's something that's high priority, I like to get the high priority stuff turned around the same day. But if it's stuff that's really not that urgent, or if it's something from an acquaintance that I don't really know, that I'm not really in a business relationship with, I take longer than that. People that submit guest posts, for example, to my website, I only process those once a week. And by the way, I'm pretty behind on those right now. I mean, I hate to say it, but it's the truth. But they're lower priority for me. And so I drug them into another folder, and I've got a to-do list item in Noseby for me to look at those. And I need to go through those, but my intention is to do those once a week. So I think it really depends on the priority of it. So I really hope this will help you manage your email inbox better. And I really think it's possible. I really think you can take a lot of the pain out of email processing, and you can take control. You can get ahead. You can once and for all tame this and let email not dominate your life. Well, that's it for this episode of This Is Your Life. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe to it at michaelhyatt.com. This is your life, all one word. michaelhyatt.com/This Is Your Life. This way you won't miss a single episode. You can also find more resources on my blog at michaelhyatt.com. And if you're interested in having me speak at an event, or if you want to catch one of my live presentations, check out my speaking page at michaelhyatt.com/speaking. Until next time, remember, your life is a gift. Now go make it count.
This is your life. Are you who you want to be? This is your life. Are you who